Hi there. Every religion in the world seems to have a reference to how everything began, or sort of theory of cosmology, or the origins of the universe, and also a mythic explanation of what went wrong with everything, what has got wrong, and why is this world such a beastly place to live in, and why do people do such bad things to each other and to themselves. And I've been watching this excellent analysis of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion. Uh, and without going into details about that, I've left the link of the excellent lecture in the description below. It seems that the origins of what might be called evil arise from alienation, according to Tolkien. But I would suggest that the antecedent of alienation is isolation. And so you get a pathway that takes you from isolation to alienation from the one, whatever that is. We'll come back to that in a minute. Going into a sort of form of psychopathy or sociopathy, whereby the isolated, alienated individual or force or institution, but usually individual, or in this case, some kind of mythic power or God or whatever, looks at other beings, other sentient beings, and sees them either as food fodder or pawns to be pushed around a chessboard in a game of power and power acquisition, or simply beings to have power over, in the sense of being able to abuse them and have power over somebody or persons. So this alienation, this sort of psychopathy, arises, as I say, from alienation, from isolation, from the one. And I was thinking, I suppose this one, in primitive terms, is the collective, is the actual village. In a lot of African myths and African animist practice, you never go outside the village on your own for fear of becoming possessed by a passing demon, which are marauding about in the bush as savage, sort of demonic entities that can just hop into people and take them over, should they be foolish enough to go off on their own anywhere. And it's such that even a group of women will all go off and pee together in a circle, because it isn't safe for one woman or one man indeed to go off on their own. And of course, there's lots of stories about people being given knowledge as a result of going out on their own, and of course, going out into the desert on your own is a very powerful mythic motif, as we all know, the temptation of Christ, of course, and being an example of a person going out and being confronted by an evil demon as a result of being outside, temporarily outside the community. And when they come back into the community, they bring some knowledge with them. But that's only for very special people. For most people, going out on becoming isolated from the collective will, from the collective wisdom, and also I think, from the dialogue. When you think of a village, when you think of any group of people, there's always a dialogue going on, and truth and reality are being constructed as a result of this active dialogue. But when you go out on your own somewhere, you've got no more dialogue because you've got nobody to speak to. You've got no friends, no peer group or anything, and that means that you become possibly open to delusion because you get an idea, an idée fixe in your idea, and there's nobody to counter that idea. There's no one to tell you that that doesn't sound like a great idea to me. So you begin to become sort of uh, caught up in almost a sin of pride and almost an ego, and every idea that you have seems like the greatest idea anyone's ever had, and you just you barge forth and you go forth and you take that idea to its extremes, because there's no checks and balances and there's nobody to say you can't do that or that's a really bad idea, or even to through dialogue modify your ideas in some way. So there's no checks and balances. You become a sort of tyrant of your own mind. And then as a result of that isolation, you become hostile towards what you perceive to be the collective will, which is somehow seen by you as a sort of cage or a prison or something of conventionality. And you become more and more outrageous and more sort of, as I say, psychopathic. And you begin to look at everybody and everything, as I said, as things. So sentient beings lose their sentience and become like objects to be pushed around, thrown about, made love to, uh, tortured, dismembered, whatever, because you begin to think that there isn't anything else that's feeling anything apart from you, and you become the center of the universe, and only you matter, and only the power over others matters. So you become kind of drenched in power and the thirst for power, which is extended not only to just wanting things, wanting money, but actually wanting power over other people. So your little megalomaniacs that are born. Remember the Yahoo groups and all the groups online. You always get somebody. The moderator becomes a megalomaniac, and he or she exercises power over people because they can block, and they can throw you out of the threaten to throw you out of the group, and in various different ways they begin to get more and more power hungry, and more deranged, of course. And as they become more and more insecure and think there's more people plotting against them, to usurp their power, they become more paranoid and therefore more vicious as they're backed into a corner. So from this rather depressing view, I suppose, of individuals that become alienated from reality itself, reality as it is agreed upon by the collective, or even constructed as a result of an ongoing dialogue between people, argument if you're a dialectic between people. So you get the sort of, you get the kind of dictators and tyrants sort of growing up. And very often, when you think about Napoleon, he was bullied because he was a Corsican and didn't speak proper French, and everybody laughed at him at Naval College or wherever, or at school, and he was totally bullied and totally isolated and totally alienated. And then that's sort of when he began to, I don't know, formulate his ideas of the sort of the strong man taking over management of the government. And then he saw, of course, that the French Revolution had left a big vacuum of government, and he wished to fulfill it, or fill that vacuum with what he saw as truth and light and justice and perfection. And then, of course, the rest, as we know, is history, because then he began to get more tyrannical, with no checks and balances, no one to check his power. And then he began, on a ridiculous crusade to invade to invade Europe. But there was a lot of good things he did for France, of course, and if not for the world, and if not for science and technology as well, in an indirect way. But on the whole, the part, well, we've seen the latter part of the 20th century, with the growth of tyrants of various kinds, and shaped by various ideologies, of course, including Marxism. And then we know that that the bloody history is common knowledge, really. Well, perhaps not common knowledge now, unfortunately, because a lot of people don't know much about history, which is a grave oversight, really, on the educational system, in my opinion. Anyway, because otherwise we're forced to, if we don't know our history, we're forced to repeat this history over and over and over again and never learn from anything. But anyway, so we must learn that the origins of evil arise from a sense of alienation and isolation, and it isn't good to be on your own. Basically, it isn't good to be, in your bedroom, sort of, playing computer games, filling your head up with things that have no checks or balances. You become, unstable. You become unbalanced, literally unbalanced, because your input, your data, is just from one source, or and that's all that you know. I mean, it's not just the internet, of course. This is, history has done this to lots of individuals and groups of people, of course, and they have begun to get more and more out of touch with reality and natural ethics and everything. And we all know where that leads. So the Church of Nowhere, basically, you should engage in dialogue with people. That's the point, really. You should make sure that you have some kind of dialogue going on with somebody, ongoing, and just open your creative output or your ideas, open them up to criticism, and take criticism as being not a negative thing but a positive thing, and a positive, a helpmeet to you, really. And so you don't get a need a fix, and you go down a path from which it is impossible to extricate yourself later. Unless, of course, you just want to, isolate yourself and go gradually more and more insane. In which case, that's I can guarantee that it'll all end in tears, really. It is like one of the church revealers, like Danny Shine. I mean, you may not like Danny Shine, and you may not agree with a lot of what he says, but he does, stimulate dialogue, and he does engage people in dialogue, which perhaps has a modulating or effect on both him and the people in his audience as well. So it could be that sometimes, both Danny Shine and his audience benefit from the controversy, from the sometimes rather controversial dialogue which ensues, sometimes the argument, if you like. So the argument shouldn't be, we shouldn't be afraid of argument, disagreement. So we shouldn't be afraid of vigorous disagreement if it comes to that. But as long as we ultimately remember that, perhaps we've got to give and give and give, which sometimes is better than take and take and take. Do you know what I mean? And that we don't want to end up becoming possessed by our own sense of grandeur, or sense of self-deification, which, when taken too far, leads to self-destruction ultimately, of course.